So it's a great pleasure to have you all here for this second part of the Purpose Day, to make purpose a reality in firms, and just to try to have like forthright and candid discussions about purpose. So for this second part, I will tell you in a second how we will be managing this. But just before I start, I wanted just to reiterate that this event is made possible thanks to the Sustainability and Organization Institute at HEC Paris and the Purpose Center. But the Purpose Center and the SNO Institute would have not been possible without the sponsorship and the support of many individuals. The first of them being Hubert Joly, the former chairman and CEO of Best Buy in the US, who has been followed by dozens of individuals, and today one firm, Mazar, who is, I think, some people from Mazar are in the room. And so thanks to all of them, we can make this event free. We can share our knowledge or experiences, and we can partner with Oxford for this event. And I want also to thank our partner, the Center for Reputation at Oxford, Saïd, the entire team, Anna and Caroline and all the others, Laura and Samuel and all the other people coming from Oxford. And it's also the time for me, because usually at the end we don't have much time, but it's also a time for me just to thank the entire SNO team for all the efforts that they have put in this. I think I will take the mic just before you leave to the cocktail to make some special thanks to people individually at that time. So Rupert, before we break up, let's keep and remind this, that I actually like just to have a last thank you for people. Okay, so what is happening now? What is happening now is that you have the extraordinary chance, I think, to meet with incredible people. The first in line is Hubert Joly himself, that I just mentioned. So as you may know, Hubert actually passed his work, his position onto Corey at Best Buy, and since then has been actually professor at Harvard Business School. So he cannot be really with us today because actually he's doing some executive education program on purpose, believe it or not. But actually we have like a very short movie for him to welcome you all about this part of the evening. Immediately following this 8-minute video, we have the great honor just to welcome Ed Freeman, the father of the stakeholder theory, in person here on stage for us tonight. And after that, I will hand over to Rupert and to panelists. We'd like to try to discuss the fact, to discuss whether investors care, or maybe they don't, about purpose-driven companies. And so we'll have Aleksandra from Eurosif starting with a brief speech about what regulation could do to help actually firms develop purpose and investors invest, and then the panel, and I will let Rupert to manage the panel. So again, a big thanks for being here tonight, and I think that without further ado, we can go and listen Hubert.
Good evening, everyone. Of course, I wish I could have been present with you tonight in person, but I'm still very grateful to have this opportunity to share a few thoughts with you and well wishes. I'm of course particularly excited by the fact that we're hosting today the second Purpose Day, and I really want to congratulate you, Rodolphe, for having been a pioneer and having inspired us over so many years. You started, I think, the SNO Institute more than 10 years ago. You started the Purpose Center, I remember this, about 5 years ago. And you've led the charge on research, on teaching, on acting. And I want to thank you for your partnership and being such a great source of inspiration. I also want to congratulate the Saïd Business School, who has also been a pioneer in this field and is joining us in this second Purpose Day today. Perhaps what I want to do is share a few convictions as you start your evening, and maybe some thoughts about the way ahead, the way forward. So the convictions, I'll start by saying that I think so many of us, and certainly everybody in the room, believe that purpose is more important today than ever. Purpose is more important today than ever. Why do we say this? Why do we think this? I think it's first true at the personal level. Right? If we think about it, and there's research that establishes that those who can live a life that is meaningful in pursuit of a higher purpose, find more joy in life, in fact, live happier and a healthier life. So it's good for you in any event. But what's good for you at the individual level is also good for you at the company level. In fact, if we think about a company as a human organization, made of individuals working together in pursuit of a goal, pursuing a higher purpose is going to be good for us as well. It's going to be good, to be able to attract, retain, develop, and excite our employees. It's going to be good to attract customers. Most customers today, that's what they say, want to do business with a purposeful company. And over time, it's been established that, companies that pursue a higher purpose and genuinely make it come to life, and if that purpose is at the center of some needs in the world, the unique capabilities of the company, what people at the company are passionate about, and how to make money, then this can indeed lead to superior returns for shareholders. I've seen that certainly in my personal experience. But there's more to it than that. I think we can all agree that we live in a very chaotic and challenging world. And when everything around us is changing, then going back to our purpose in life and to our values allows us to pursue a true north and navigate what are otherwise choppy water. In fact, it can help companies reinvent themselves in a very changing environment. I know this from experience at Best Buy. If we had continued to be just a simple consumer electronics retailer, I don't think we would have experienced the growth that we have experienced. And so when we redefine our purpose and said we are here to enrich lives through technology by addressing key human needs, it opened up a whole range of growth opportunities. So first conviction is that purpose is more important today than ever. The second conviction, which is more an observation, is that, as we say in London, mind the gap, right? There's a big gap at most companies, at many companies, between the intention of the purpose and the reality in the company. At Harvard Business School, where I lead a workshop for new CEOs, I asked the CEOs, two questions. One is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important would it be to the success, the long-term success of the company, to pursue a higher purpose? And on a scale of 1 to 10, their average answer is 9, so very high. The second question I asked them is, today, to what extent is that purpose truly coming to life today? And their average answer is between 5 and 6. So there's a big gap. And the reason is that, we know it's hard. And what I've learned over the years and what it takes, I think it starts with, as leaders, having clarity around our own purpose and, being clear about that purpose. In fact, being curious about the purpose of people around us. It continues with making the purpose the keystone of the strategy, really looking at the portfolio of activities, our positioning in the market, and looking at what needs to be stopped, what needs to be studied, and what can be continued for the purpose to come to life. And it continues with the culture. I'm a big believer that having the right environment in support of the purpose and the strategy is key to long-term success. I think Microsoft under Satya Nadella provides a great example of that. When Satya became CEO, that's where he put the emphasis on culture, implementing a growth mindset and a culture of empathy. The other thing I would highlight, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, is this idea of embracing all stakeholders as we implement our strategies. So Best Buy is headquartered in Minneapolis, of course, and following the murder of George Floyd in 2020, when the city is on fire, it's very simple. You cannot open the stores. And to quote Rebecca Anderson, my colleague at Harvard, if the planet is on fire, you don't have a business. So we need to make a declaration of interdependence, and as we lead businesses, is refuse zero-sum games and make sure we do a good job of embracing all stakeholders. The other thing I've noted is that making a purpose come to life, it's not about a communication campaign. It's not about putting in place incentives. If you use carrots and sticks, you get donkeys, right? So that's not going to work. It's much more about calling on the key drivers of human motivation, meaning, authentic human connections, psychological safety, learning, a growth mindset, and certainly the idea of feeling empowered. And all of this, I think, has significant leadership implications. Last century, the model of the leader was the know-it-all, who was the smartest person in the room, who had all of the answers. Today, I have this vision of the leader as a gardener. So in gardening, of course, you need some landscaping, so that's the frame, but you need to make sure that the soil is fertile. That's really what you do, so that all of the seeds, all of these human beings can blossom and be the best, biggest, most beautiful version of ourselves. So this calls on leadership qualities that are very different today than certainly, when I was taught when I was growing up. I think the qualities that we like to emphasize in leaders we like to follow are authenticity, vulnerability, empathy, humility, and certainly humanity. So very different model. So in conclusion, as we look at the environment around us, we can say it's the worst of times, but we can say also, as Charles Dickens would have said, it's the best of times. And this is almost a call for action for all of us, right? We can challenge ourselves to raise to the occasion and lead in a way where people will say 10 years from now, this was their finest hour. And do the work, continue the work. We're just at the beginning. And do the work following, right off your framework, right? On research, on teaching, and of course, on activation. So as you start your evening, I want to wish you a fun and highly productive session. Again, I wish I was with you, but I can only wish that you have a terrific evening. So thank you for your attention, and good luck. Thank you.
So after these, I would say, comforting words call for action from Hubert, I'd like just to welcome Ed Freeman. And I think that everybody knows you in the room, but I'll just to maybe introduce you a bit more formally. So Ed, you received a BA in Mathematics and Philosophy from Duke University and a PhD in Philosophy from Washington University. You taught at the University of Minnesota, but also you started at Wharton School, and later you joined the Darden School of the University of Virginia as the Ellis and Sidney Olson Professor of Business Administration. So as a philosopher, you became professor at business schools. You are the academic director of the Business Roundtable Institute for Corporate Ethics and director of the Darden Olson Center for Applied Ethics. Maybe some people know that you love sports and have been known as a black belt, actually, in Taekwondo, and as a musician who plays in band, both keyboards and guitar. Over the past years, you received many lifetime achievements, awards from, for instance, the World Resource Institute and the Aspen Institute, the Humboldt University Conference on Corporate Social Responsibility, the Academy of Management, which is the most select academic institution in management, and the Society for Business Ethics. You have been awarded 7 honorary doctorate, and we are very proud because the 7th was last evening at HEC Paris, and we are very grateful for you coming to our school. So why so many honors? Well, mainly, but not only, but mainly because you introduced to the world the stakeholder theory. More precisely, you published 40 years ago, and it's therefore an anniversary, a book which is not called the stakeholder theory, but it's called Strategic Management, a Stakeholder Approach. So that means that the stakeholder theory was really thought as a model for business, and I think you will mention this. And this stakeholder theory is actually a theory of organizational management and business ethics that addresses morals and values in managing an organization and in particular firms. So at a time when capitalist economies are under fire, as Hubert just said, we thought that our second Purpose Day, it was kind of natural to hear you about the stakeholder theory and the purpose in action. And I think that the subtitle was When Do the Ends Meet? So Ed, is a great honor, is a great pleasure that I will actually leave the floor to leave it to you. Thank you. So we'll have after Ed's presentation like 15 minutes or so of questions, and there will be mics that will be circulating around. So be ready and prepare your questions.
I'm not doing my email, I'm just checking the time, so that's just wanted to be sure. Thank you very much, Rudy. It's a great honor to be here. It was a terrific honor that HCC paid me yesterday, and I'm eternally grateful to be in one of my favorite cities in the world, near, actually, my favorite cafe, Le Dumédo. And it's been a real treat. I only wish I could stay longer, but I have 70 papers to grade when I go back that way there. I wrote this old Stakeholder book in 1984, and I didn't think it just doesn't sound strange. I didn't think the stakeholder idea was very interesting. Why? It was too common sense. I mean, I grew up poor on a farm in Georgia, in the U.S., and we knew, even though we were poor and didn't really have anything, but we knew we needed to deal with the people that could affect us and the people that we could affect. I mean, that was sort of life 101. And then when I wrote about that, people thought, well, this is radical. And I kind of missed it. I gave it to my wife to read before I published it. She was a Wharton MBA, and she said in her inimitable way, well, this is common sense. You'll never make a living at this. There was, I thought, a really interesting idea in the book. And I thought, this is going to be the thing I will make my academic reputation on. It's an idea I called enterprise strategy or purpose. And we said, well, you know, the first question of strategy in those days is where are we going or what business are we in? And I thought a better question was, what do you stand for? If you could answer what do you stand for, then that would set some boundaries around what business you were in. And I thought this was the thing that was going to really make a mark in strategy, and nobody cared, it turns out. And no one has ever sort of, I thought there were going to be dozens of PhD dissertations on enterprise strategy, and this was going to really change the world. It's an idea that's in Peter Drucker and some other places. And there were 0 dissertations on enterprise strategy. So it warms my heart to see so many people gathered together to talk about purpose. And I really enjoyed sitting in on some of the sessions this afternoon and learned a great deal. I think your existence and what you're doing is more evidence that the old story of business needs to be abandoned. What's the old story? Business is about the money. It's about, making money for shareholders. It's about lazy, good-for-nothing people who you have to incentivize in order to get them to do something. It's about seeing human beings as one-dimensional maximizers of our own short-term self-interest. And that story, if it was ever useful, is certainly not useful for the challenges that we see today. The good news is there's a new story. It's a new story, a new narrative, and it's being written by you, by your companies, as you take on ideas like purpose. The new story, my short form of the new story is stakeholders, purpose, values and ethics, societal issues are at least as important as money and profits. And that profits actually follow, or it's possible that profits follow from these ideas. No guarantees, but the question of possibility, I think, has been answered. I want to talk briefly about each of these ideas, but I want to emphasize that they're all connected. You can't think about purpose in isolation from the others. You can't think about the others in isolation from purpose. So the first idea I'm going to talk about, no surprise, stakeholders. Every business has always created, or sometimes destroyed, value for customers, suppliers, employees, communities, people with money. That's just what business is. That's why I thought it was such a ridiculously simple and common sense idea. Building and leading a business involves getting these interests going in the same direction. The phrase I like is, you need to harmonize their interest. Harmony, because in music, the notes are different, but when they're in harmony, they sound pretty good together. And so getting these interests harmonized is a way to think of it. I don't like saying getting them aligned, because they're never going to be the same. And you don't want them to be the same. Now, this is a lot easier if you have a sense of purpose, it seems to me. It's a lot easier to get these interests in the same tune as the purpose. But it's also easier to do if you have a sense of ethics, if you have a sense that business is a societal institution as well as a market institution. Let me take just a minute and talk about what creating value for stakeholder means, at least to me, because that gets misinterpreted a lot. It gets misinterpreted as this is just about civil society. It gets misinterpreted as it's about making everybody happy. It gets misinterpreted as it's corporate social responsibility. And for me, let me be clear, it's about the business model. What's a business? A business just is. A business model is how you're going to create value simultaneously for customers, suppliers, employees, communities, and the people with the money. And the "and" is very important. The important thing to see, and all of you in business know this, stakeholders are interdependent. How you deal with one depends on how you deal with the others. Think for a minute about, you can write the value created for shareholders as some function of the value you created for all the others. It's how much money you make. It's a function of how you deal with customers and suppliers and employees and communities. And that's true for each one. They're interdependent. Their interests need to be harmonized without thinking about trade-offs. Economists love trade-offs. Pragmatist philosophers, not so much. Why? Because if you look for trade-offs, I'm gonna take away from this stakeholder and give over here. You can do that. Trade-offs are easy. What's hard is to figure out how to both win. What's hard is figuring out when wins. And if you can figure that out, you can't always, you can build a great business. Thinking about stakeholders is thinking about relationships, not transactions. What does it mean to think about relationships? We know this in our personal lives. If I'm in a relationship with somebody, there's a presumption it's going to continue. Both parties have to care about the other, right? Companies need to actually care about their customers and their employees, etc. And if they don't, pretty much their customers and employees, etc., can tell. And there's this idea that if you're in a relationship with somebody, you don't have to keep score every day. It's not about transactions where you try to decide who won this one. You know, was this price too high or too low? Did I get a good price, etc. I've been married for a long time, I need to figure out the number of years exactly pretty soon, because I know I have an anniversary coming up. I think it's going to be 47, but I'm not going to bet the ranch on that right now. And if I were to go down to my wonderful spouse's office at Darden and say, hey, babe, I've been thinking, I think you're ahead by 3. I think you owe me 3. That's the score after 46 years. I'm pretty sure I know what the answer to that would be. She's a 2nd-degree black belt in Taekwondo, and I've had both my hips replaced, so I can't run real fast. So that would not be necessarily healthy for me. Thinking about stakeholders is thinking about relationships, and the only way to do this, same as in a marriage, is continuous engagement and two-way conversation. Both of those things turn out to be centrally important. Second idea, purpose. Business, I believe, is primarily about purpose. Money and profits can follow as an outcome. The old story of business just gets purpose wrong. They say the purpose of business is to make as much money as possible. As much money for shareholders subject to law and ethical custom, if you want to really read Milton Friedman. And that's a lot like saying, I got to have red blood cells to live. Right? I'm on good scientific ground with that. But the purpose of my life is not to make red blood cells. And even when I can tell you it wasn't a very pleasant time, I had to have both my hips replaced. And I actually had to worry about making red blood cells. It's a long time ago, big surgery, 4.5 pints of blood. So I had to worry about that. Still wasn't the purpose of my life. Business must make profits. They must make profits at least at the weighted average cost of capital, which is some complicated finance thing. It's always about 10%, but that's their gig, so I'm not going to say anything about that. But it doesn't follow without a lot more argument that making money is the purpose of business. The entrepreneurs I know don't start a business to make as much money as they can. If I have students who come to me and say, hey, I'm going to start this business, we're going to flip it, it's going to be a unicorn, I'm going to be rich, I tell them to get a job. Because it's a hell of a lot easier to get rich having a job than it is to start a business. That's hard. Starting a business is really hard, and you're completely destroyed several times before you figure it out. Entrepreneurs don't start businesses. Like, they start businesses because they're on fire about something. Whether it's Bill Gates on fire about the computer revolution, whether it's a friend of mine, John Mackey, on fire about having us eat better food and starting Whole Foods. A friend of mine who runs this little restaurant, or did until it closed, in Copenhagen called Noma, seen as one of the best restaurants in the world, said, we didn't start Noma to make as much money as we can, because we didn't make any for the first 19 years. Now, we've heard a little this afternoon about, in the session before, about dissent. And I took it, I was a little unclear, but I think people meant about dissent from people inside a company who disagreed with the purpose. I think dissent plays an incredibly crucial role, but I want to see it a little bit differently. I want to talk about people who believe in the purpose, but think you're not living it, right? Their dissent is incredibly important. You want to know when you're not living your purpose. I don't know about you, but my children are pretty clear about this with me. I was once telling my son, who was about 10, that I couldn't take him to the father-son basketball camp. I had to be in Indonesia. He looked at me. He's 10 now, so this is not the little teenager stuff. He's 10. He said, Dad, what's more important, your family or your job? And I said, my family, of course, Ben. And he said, well, you're not living it. You're not doing it. And and you know what? He was right. I could have scheduled this Indonesia trip whenever I wanted. he was very proud. I'd won the three-point shooting contest the year before, and he wanted me to go defend that. And I just didn't think about it. And I said to him, I think you're right. I got to go to Indonesia because I made a commitment. I said, but next year I won't travel. I'll coach your team. We'll hang out. And I did that the next several years. And we created a lot of value. But we created value because he pushed back. He doesn't push back, we don't create that value. How much value gets left on the table in companies because people don't push back? People don't dissent. They don't say, I don't think we're living this. If purpose matters, you must build in dissent. You must build in people disagreeing with the words on the paper that you're living it. If you don't build that in, my advice is don't have anything to do with thinking about purpose, because you'll just disappoint people. Everybody knows the story of Johnson & Johnson of extra strength Tylenol. 8 people died. What most people don't know is that the year before that, Jim Burke, the CEO, went around to groups of managers at J&J and said, here's our purpose. It's called the Credo. And let's figure out where we're living it, where we're not. Let's take it down if we need to. And they had a conversation about that. And they would come up with things that they needed to change in the company if they were serious about their Credo. This got built into the management development process. And guess what? That's one of the things that made J&J a high-purpose company for a long time. So this idea of pushback and dissent, not among people who disagree with the purpose, essentially high-purpose companies will eject those people like a virus over time. But the people who do agree, who are going to hold your feet to the fire, like my son held my feet to the fire, that's what you want to create value. The purpose conversation, to me, I think of it as a conversation, not a statement. Purpose doesn't live in the purpose statement, I'm sorry to say. It lives in the processes, it lives in the systems, it lives in how people treat each other every day, you know? And if you can't take those things on as a live conversation, you know, I've been in companies where people said, yeah, we have values. I've got a values card here somewhere. I'm not sure what, you know. And my sense is you don't have one. If purpose doesn't go all the way through the organization, you don't really have one. I remember sitting with the CEO and his top 50 people or so in a session, and he said they knew they needed to change their purpose statement. And he said, how many people, look at the old state statement. How many people have ever made a decision ever with this in mind? There were no hands in the room. So, yeah, there was some stuff on paper, but it didn't matter. And they were willing to do the hard work to not only craft a new statement, but to begin to set their processes and systems up against this to see if they were really living it. In short, purpose is in the details, not just the statement. Well, I think I'm pretty optimistic that there are lots of companies, as Hubert said, who are trying to deal with this now. And what a good purpose statement and process can be, a good conversation is, it's inspiring. You inspire people. Suppose this side of the room is motivated and incentivized, and this side of the room, and MBA'd and management up, all that sort of stuff, and this side of the room is inspired. You show up because you think it's absolutely important for you to be there every day, both for the people next to you and given what you're doing. And let's suppose you're in the same industry. Who's going to win? They're going to beat you 1,000,000-0. They're going to have to make up competition because you're not going to be much, right? And it's that inspiration for people that's so important that gives the possibility of this working and making more money but also making meaning. You know, purpose asks you it sets the stage for value creation for stakeholders. It makes you ask, does your organization make a difference? Lots of people, from investment managers to CEOs, have talked a lot about purpose and what that means. I don't need to quote all these examples to you, but again, inspiring us, giving us meaning, giving us discipline. Purpose tells us what it's possible to do and what it's not possible to do. It helps us facilitate collaborating together, harmonizing stakeholder interest, and helping to solve our most difficult problems. Again, I would say the challenges here are that the statements are the first steps. The integration with everyday processes and systems is hard. Integration with key stakeholders is difficult. And there's the necessity of values and ethics. We had a situation a few years ago where a high-purpose organization came to our university and marched. They're Nazis. They were very well organized, and they had a purpose. So purpose has to go with values and ethics. Those things have to go together. I think we don't understand how values work quite enough. If I were to say to you, look, we've got this ethics issue that's just come up, and I really want us to deal with this ethics issue right now with the rest of our time. How many of you, I'll take a show of hands, just thought, oh, somebody's figured out something real cool that's going to make our lives better? Anybody? No, of course not, because we think about values and ethics as the bad stuff. But think about it for a minute. If business gets credit for the bad stuff, and it should, shouldn't it get credit for the good stuff as well? You know, but we don't think about that. When I tell people I teach business ethics, they have to kind of manage not to laugh, you know, as some of you are not doing. And they tell me things like, must be a short course, or I didn't know business had any, or two words, you put them together, contradiction, oxymoron, you know, like jumbo shrimp, or American football is another oxymoron. I played and I don't know the rules. Most organizations underperform because they don't understand how values work. Again, the idea of challenge has to be central here. And we need to do values as well as purpose. We need to do it right, or I think we need not to do it at all. CEO said to me once, by the time an issue gets to me, it's been washed and dried and scanned and PowerPointed and cleaned up and everything. I don't really know what the underlying issues are by the time I get it. So what I have to do is figure out what's the set of questions that I want the people who work for me to ask. And if we can figure out that set of questions, then I got a better shot at making the hard decisions that are there. Another bunch of CEOs said, you know, on this last idea I'm going to talk about societal issues, business being an important societal actor, they say, you know, Ed, we don't really know how to deal with this. We don't know how to decide whether I should deal with this issue or that issue. Should I deal with inequality? Should I deal with women's rights? How do I decide that? And I think the answer to that is actually deceptively easy. Do you have a purpose conversation? Does your organization not just have a set of values, but have a live set of values so that people talk about that all the time? And do you really understand what stakeholders you're trying to serve? Well, all of these ideas need a view of human beings that is sophisticated. Human beings are not, they're not one-dimensional maximizers of their own self-interest. Yeah, we can be that way, But anybody who's ever been in love or who's ever, had a child knows we're capable of so much more. We're capable of bad stuff too, but we're also capable of incredible acts of kindness and heroism and just helping other people. And so this idea, in other words, we're both self-interested and other-regarding at the same time. Yeah, incentives can be important, but so are values. So let's take these ideas about stakeholders, purpose, ethics and values, seeing business as a societal institution, and seeing human complexity for all it's worth in business. And let's create a different, more responsible, and just better version of business. We all know in our hearts it's the right thing to do. There are no guarantees, however. No guarantees you're going to make more money. It's possible that you will, and people have demonstrated that pretty much, as we talked about in the last session. But there are no guarantees here. But there are two things here that I would close with here. The first is, does anybody possibly know or ever heard of a guitarist named Warren Haynes? And those of you who heard me talk yesterday weren't listening, because I said, no, it's just joking. Warren Haynes is a great blues guitarist, and he was. I was watching a video of him trying to teach people to play slide guitar. Any guitarists here? Gotta be a few. And when you play slide, when you learn to play slide, it's like you're killing the cat with evil intent. That's pretty much what it sounds like. So Warren Haynes is doing this, and I'm struggling trying to do it. And he stops, and he says, now, see, when you play the blues, it doesn't matter how many notes you play. You just have to mean the notes that you play. The world is coming at us at a very fast pace. It may be at a very fast pace that we human beings can't deal with. I hope that's not true. But what's critical for us is that we figure out not just playing a bunch of notes, we figure out the notes that we mean. Anybody who's ever heard B.B. King play that kind of one-note pull-off, of which there's more emotion and style and grace in that one note than there is in the 87 played by other people, knows. Figure out the notes you mean to play. That's what the conversation about purpose has to do. And finally, on a personal sense, I get asked all the time, what's the kind of one trade-off? And I said this last night, I'll say it again. I've said it a lot of times, if you've seen videos. It's a rule I like to call the Ben, Emma, and Molly rule that says, that names my 3 kids. Can I go home? Can I say to Ben, Emma, and Molly, let me tell you what I did today that I'm proud of, that I want you to learn from. If we're not trying to make our organizations places for our children to live in, we'd have the bar too low. We certainly need to do that. We need to do it with our churches and mosques and synagogues and schools and universities, and certainly our corporations. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to answer questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ed. So it's time for questions. So may I suggest that actually we take 3 questions in a row so that, Ed, you can answer them all or just pick some. So there should be some mics circulating here. Yes.
What advice would you give to the developer of a wind farm in France, faced with the challenge of the locals who say, great, we're all for wind power, but just not here?
Yeah, those. Oh, sorry, you say 2 more. Yeah,
2 more.
Right. Okay.
Mic is coming.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor. What advice would you give to HEC faculty and the school for them, for us, to train better leaders who allow for challenge?
Yeah.
Do we actually meet our purpose or not? Have you seen any clues? Have you seen any schools doing stuff that inspired you, that we could draw inspiration from to train better leaders?
And the third?
I've transmitted my jet lag to everybody I see.
In companies, we are building some stakeholder committees in order to bring value from stakeholders to the company. What advice can you give us in order to select the stakeholders that should be part of the stakeholder committees?
I'm not sure I quite understand. Just say
I will repeat, no issue.
Yeah.
In groups, we are building some stakeholder committees in order to challenge the management, the top management of the group. What advice can you give us in order to select the stakeholders that should be part of the stakeholder committees?
Great. Okay. Got it. NIMBY, I don't know what to do about. You know, you have to engage and engage again and again and again. I once said, I asked a group of Japanese managers who said, I said, what would you do if you couldn't get this stakeholder to agree? And they said, we'd go out and talk some more until we got their agreement. And I said, yeah, but you know, you can't. It doesn't work. You can't get their agreement. And they said, we would go and talk some more until we got their agreement. And I said, but yeah, really, you can't. I'll stay here. Really, you can't get them. They just won't come around. And they said, we'd go out and talk some more until we got their agreement. So I don't know much better than that, other than to say stakeholders are paid in multiple currencies. And oftentimes we're not creative enough to think about those multiple currencies that are there. And this would lead me to the second question. I think the most important thing for business schools to do is, yes, we need to do economics and finance and data and all that sort of stuff as kind of, you know, that's the table stakes. But what we really need to do is to teach folks how to use their creative imagination. Because it's the creative imagination that will help us find win-win-wins. And I think at most business schools, again, I'm not making a claim about yours or mine. We're not very good at that. We're good at the table stakes. We're not very good at the critical, creative stuff. And that means more liberal arts. And I think that's what we need. That's what we need to do. In terms of getting stakeholder committees to work, I really don't know. I'm not a big fan of that. I think mostly what you do is you do one-on-one engagements. Because when you put together, unless you're really good at doing this, you often can create more problems than you solve. So I like to think about one-on-one engagements that are there and doing those over and over and over again, then maybe adding some, etc. Now, if you think about stakeholder committees that are just civil society oriented, those are okay, but for me, stakeholders are also customers and suppliers and employees, and trying to figure out their currencies, their behaviors, is really central, I think.
So let's take a second round of 3 questions, as we have like 5 minutes to go before moving to the next part.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your remarks tonight, Professor. I wonder if you might share a bit about your view of how the Business Roundtable in the United States, in terms of the stakeholder capitalism and that, how it's been attacked like so many things, and do you feel like it's met the objectives? Is it the way it's being interpreted now by politically interested groups? Maybe give us some ideas on that.
Next. Don't be shy.
We have someone over here.
Hello. I was really enjoyed your comment about what I'm proud of and what we need to learn from. But my sort of corollary question was, once we've done that reflection, what first step should we take to move those reflections into action.
Okay, I just missed
Thank
the
you.
first part.
Oh, sorry, you said what I'm proud of and what we need to learn from. Yeah?
Okay,
Thank you.
okay.
And the last one?
Hello, thank you, Professor Freeman, for being here and telling us about the great stories about the stakeholders and how your wife mentioned it was just everyday life practice. I had a question about what's happening in Europe after the Loi Pact and the fact that companies can put in their company statutes not only their purpose but their commitment axis. Is it something that you see emerging in the States and something that you see as a positive way to integrate stakeholders in the everyday life of a company?
Well, I'll take that first and say, look, sunshine helps everything. So, you know, not forced sunshine, forcing you to disclose, I think, can be helpful, but voluntary disclosure is best. More companies are doing that, and there's a company that it's a not-for-profit called Just, J-U-S-T, Capital. And Just Capital ranks the Russell 1000, they're all public companies, ranks them in terms of justice, by which they mean how are they doing with customers and suppliers. No, they don't use suppliers. Customers, employees, communities, shareholders, and the environment, I think. And they rank them. After George Floyd, companies pledged $50 billion to deal with racial inequality. Just Capital keeps score in terms of what they're doing. And if you go to the Just Capital website, you'll see what they're trying to do in terms of how they measure what companies are doing. And I think that's a really good thing. It throws sunshine on stuff that's not always in the sun. I'm just trying to remember the other two questions. My mind is gone.
The first two. So you had a question.
Oh, right. Just give me a word or two again. So I
was looking at what I'm proud of.
Oh, right.
What we learn from that first step once you've reflected.
What's next?
Yeah.
Well, I learned that. I learned that from my kids, and we always treated our kids as human beings. You know, we talk to them about most anything. Nothing's off the record. They could say whatever they wanted. We told them if they said certain words, we weren't going to bail them out at school, you know. But we always sort of tried to have pretty free and open conversations with them. Ethics to me is about conversations. It's about the kind of conversations you can have because they're about how we're going to live. And that's ultimately kind of the most important thing that you can do. On this business about the backlash, you asked. First of all, I didn't have anything to do. I was once academic director of this Business Roundtable Institute, but we didn't really do anything. We hadn't really done anything with that for the past 10 years, really. That was an old position on my CV. But my fist was raised in the air when they came out with it as, yes, finally, you know, they did it. And I saw, a good deal of mine and others' ideas in that. It was an important symbolic gesture. Did all 181 companies really mean it? No, of course not. Have some of them made progress? Absolutely. That's what Just Capital is keeping up with and why it's a good thing. I think it was a watershed moment because here, 181 of the largest U.S. companies said, this shareholder value thing doesn't work anymore. It said the old story doesn't work anymore. Now, that doesn't mean we're still not in the grip of the old story, but that's hard to shake off, you know. I don't think we need to think about profits versus purpose, or stakeholders versus shareholders, or people being economically driven versus more human driven. The word between those things is and. You know, profits are important. The idea that they're wrong, that they're somehow evil is a silly idea. And so it's putting the "and" in that, enhancing the old story, so that we can normally think about purpose and profit, stakeholders and shareholders, etc. And so I think that was an important watershed moment. I try not to pay too much attention to the politicians who don't care about whether what they say is right or not. Because my faith, maybe we'll be able to fix that. I doubt it, but maybe we will. I'm optimistically skeptical. I think that's the phrase. But my faith for having a world created that's still around for my children is in you. It's in business. It's in what you do that, of course, makes money, but of course makes the world better. The problem is, the real paradox here is, I don't know how much time we have. And that's the really critical thing. What we need are thousands of experiments. We need to become a nation of entrepreneurs, because that's going to be, in my view, what saves us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ed, again. Rupert, over to you.
Wonderful, thank you so much, Ed. What we're going to do is we're going to finish today with a double session, 15 minutes on the regulatory environment around purpose. And I'm thrilled to welcome Aleksandra Palinska to the stage. She is the Executive Director of Eurosif and has a wealth of regulatory experience, both as a Sherpa working on the regulatory reform initiatives within the EU, but also as a practitioner working in the field and representing sustainable and responsible investment companies. So, 15 minutes just to set the scene, and then I'll invite the other investors up to the stage to continue a Q&A discussion. Thank you, Aleksandra, over to you.
Thank you so much, Rupert, and hello everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here today. And I must say I'm truly honored and humbled to actually speak after such accomplished and renowned scholar and academic as Professor Freeman. So it's really truly an honor. And I must say I was very much inspired also having listened to today's but also yesterday's speech, which definitely was an excellent food for thought in terms of also now sharing some thoughts about what's happening, I would say, on the EU regulatory arena in relation to the corporate purpose, and also how, I would say, the rules can incentivize the proper corporate behavior, and also, I would say, how everybody, including investors, can play their role. Okay, let's see whether that works. Okay, so first, I'm not going to spend much time on that, but just to explain you basically who we are, explain about our organization in Eurosif, the European Sustainable Investment Forum. We are a Brussels-based organization, basically with a mission to promote sustainable development through financial markets. Our focus of our, small but effective team in Brussels is basically to focus on EU advocacy, promoting ambitious and yet implementable EU sustainable finance framework. Our membership is comprised of the national sustainable investment forests, so different organizations which basically share our mission. And here an example is FIR, Forum pour les investissements responsables here in France. Okay, just here, a little bit of a picture. Now, so I was, taking a step back and thinking, okay, what out of the different EU rules really link to the corporate purpose? And I thought it might be useful, as the idea was to give you a kind of a bigger and broader regulatory update, to go back to the 2018 Sustainable Finance Action Plan, which basically was also very much inspired by the industry, including financial industry, investors, in terms of trying to think how we can actually promote sustainability, sustainable investments, and channel basically the capital flows towards sustainability, sustainable projects basically. And here was, a bit of a kind of an overview of the different actions, because there was a whole variety of actions that was at the time considered and then mostly followed up on. And here on the right side, you have actually the 3 big aims. So reorienting capital flows towards sustainable investments, mainstreaming sustainability into risk management, and fostering transparency and long-termism. So what I also highlighted are the actions which are very specific to what I wanted to tell you today about, meaning what was originally supposed to be a proposal for sustainable corporate governance eventually was put forward as a corporate sustainability due diligence directive, but originally was actually aimed as a regulatory action, aimed at fostering more sustainable corporate governance and also strengthening, basically long-termism. Well, there were a couple of follow-ups actually to the original Sustainable Finance Action Plan, but in reality just further reinforcing, some of its core elements, including actually here strengthening corporate disclosures on sustainability, which actually has been also, I would say, touched upon, I understand, in today's and yesterday's debate, because at the end of the day, can you really manage something you don't measure, right? So the bottom line is, especially what is essential actually for investors to take informed decisions, is to actually first get the sustainability-related data on the underlying investee companies, so that then they can make informed investment decisions. This is also something which is actually essential for all stakeholders, so not only the investors, right? It's also the regulators, but it's also, I would say, the civil society, because at the end of the day, this is how we can actually judge whether the companies, are doing what they are saying they are doing, right? And hold them accountable. Then I would say a more recent, communication from the European Commission, again, reinforcing some of its actions it was planning to do in the area of sustainability and sustainable finance, have been, more focused on the need to support the transition and finance the transition. So in a way, what you can see, there has been over the years this kind of a shift from, okay, we need to promote and, finance what is already sustainable, being environmentally sustainable or socially sustainable, to, we need to finance the transition, so maybe finance the companies which, for now, are not sustainable yet, but making demonstrable efforts to become sustainable, and hence, basically, to transition and support the economic transition towards sustainability. So, as I mentioned, the key focus I'd like to maybe cover is the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, but before we go to that, I'd like to spend 2 minutes on the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, meaning actually the sustainability-related corporate disclosures. So after actually years of work, because originally back in 2000, actually 13-14, there was the first non-financial reporting directive that was actually adopted at EU level, asking basically large companies to disclose non-financial information. That was, quite a novelty. Also, in some countries, it's true that in France, the companies have been doing it now for decades. However, for some other countries, it was more of a novelty. However, one of the main challenges was that the directive gave a lot of freedom, for instance, including on which standards to disclose against, which at the end of the day created a challenge for investors and other stakeholders because the data was not really comparable. Hence, a couple of years ago, basically, Commission put forward a proposal for a corporate sustainability reporting directive, switching now to the use of the term sustainability rather than non-financial, and basically requiring all large companies and also companies with securities listed on regulated markets to disclose information on material risks and opportunities arising from social and environmental issues, and on the impact of their activities on people and the environment. And as mentioned, indeed here, the aim was to ensure that investors and all the other stakeholders, they have the information to assess basically the impact of companies on people and environment, and to assess financial risks and opportunities. And actually, in short, basically to assess the sustainability performance of the companies. And this is a directive that actually came into effect a year ago, with the first sustainability-related disclosures actually coming up this year. Well, there is a bit of a kind of a phased-in approach. So at first, only the largest companies with more than 500 employees will have to disclose. Later on, the companies also with more than 250 employees. And the biggest, I would say here, merit of this new directive, well, in a way we could say is twofold. First is that it obliges companies to disclose against European sustainability reporting standards. So we have one set of standards ensuring comparability. And these are the standards that have been developed by the European, it's financial reporting, actually organization is a kind of advisory body to the European Commission, EFRAG, which in the past was actually dealing with the transposition of the financial reporting, so the coming from ISB into Europe, and actually in view of this, it has been actually given additional mandate here and role to actually develop the sustainability reporting standards. However, what has been interesting, it has been done through its working groups involving a lot of stakeholders, actually including companies, investors, but also the civil society. So I think here the stakeholder actually concept is already kind of expanding in a way. And the first set of the standards was published actually last year, and as I said, effective already this year. The second main, I would say here, merit of this directive is that it embedded the double materiality concept into the EU law. So now basically companies are not longer only looking at the sustainability risks, so how the environment and, well, societal events can, for instance, impact the business activities and operations and the financial returns, but also actually asking companies to look how through your, well, activities you are impacting actually environment and society. And they're expected to disclose such information also across all E, so environmental, social, and governance matters. And anyway, today we don't have a lot of time because, we could spend actually hours talking also about what EFRAG has prepared to that end. Now, moving on to the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. So as I mentioned, as part of the original 2018 Action Plan on Financing Sustainable Growth, the Commission announced an initiative on sustainable corporate governance. And its original aim was, amongst others, to basically encourage business to consider environmental, including climate, biodiversity, and other matters, social, human, and economic impact in their business decisions, and to focus on long-term sustainable value creation rather than short-term financial value. On top of that, the intention was to specify directors' duty to act in the company's long-term interest while taking into account broader stakeholder interests. So here I think, it links very nicely actually to the whole idea of the, stakeholder capitalism. And unfortunately, that was one of the most controversial parts and therefore was scrapped, even actually before the directive was born. Even though actually there were nearly 500,000 responses to the public consultation of the European Commission. So, what was eventually published was a reduced version of this directive not looking at the broader corporate governance aspects, because yes, another aspect that was supposed to be looked at is how the boards are considering sustainability risks and the impacts, and to kind of embed the sustainability considerations really at the heart and the core of the corporate strategy. That, again, was quite controversial, also mostly scrapped. What remained was a corporate sustainability due diligence directive, anyway, with plenty of great merits, and basically its main aim was to oblige the largest companies, so companies with more than 500 employees, to perform mandatory environmental and human rights due diligence through value chain. What does it mean? That means that actually companies were supposed to identify whether there is any significant harm on environment or the people. So we're talking about human slavery, okay, child labor, or I don't know, oil spills. I mean, like really serious harm. Whether there is any of that, happening throughout, somehow activities of the companies, whether directly or indirectly, meaning through the value chain, and then basically either trying to, address that, remedy, also like prevent from happening again, basically, trying to address and mitigate that. And it was supposed to actually be based on the, I would say, the risk management principle, of the OECD guidance for multinational enterprises. Just one last quick thing is that the Article 15 of this directive was also quite important, as it was supposed to require companies to set and put into effect transition plans, including climate targets, meaning, a really key provision for ensuring that we can actually transition towards sustainability, because the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive only obliges companies to disclose such information, not to do. This was supposed to be a behavioral obligation to do. And finally, the last very interesting bit, actually speaking of the incentives, how to also incentivize certain behaviors within the companies, there was a provision that was supposed to encourage companies to set, I would say, remuneration-related incentives. So, for instance, that a proportion of the director's variable remuneration would be linked with actually the achievement of the climate targets. And as we all know, actually performance is a very strong incentive. Unfortunately, due to the latest political backlash in view of the upcoming elections, right now it is not even clear whether this directive would be adopted, which is a great pity, especially that in December we already had a political agreement practically endorsed by the entire parliament and the member states. So indeed, the last slide I'm going to cover is, we could also talk about SFDR, but I understand we have no time. This is indeed more connected on the transparency on the investors, in particular financial products, and how they consider sustainability risks and adverse impact in their investment decisions, but in a way it's less relevant maybe to the purpose of the corporation debate. What's next? European elections in June. So obviously this is something which is driving quite a lot what politically has been happening in the last months. And unfortunately, the future does not look great, in a sense that the predictions are that we're going to have much more far-right politicians, which is unlikely to be helpful, to the cause of promoting sustainability. And the last thing, okay, what's next? This is just, a little bit for the reflection. And I guess my main call to you will be like, look, let's not wait for the regulation. I think you all play very important roles with you in your companies. And I think basically we just need all to act. Thank you very much.
Let call up the other investors. So if the other three panelists would join us. Bertil, Matt, please, go and grab a seat somewhere in there. Great. Aleksandra, thank you so much. That's a perfect setting on which to then start to get into the question of, do investors really care about this subject? Now, we've obviously been beautifully rehearsed over many years, but why don't we start, I think, by just having a quick introduction. So I thought I would just quickly do that to save time. Anne, to my left, Anne Simpson, has had a hugely impressive career in investment in the US and in Europe, with a corporate governance focus. First of all at PERC, the Pension Investments Research Corporation, which I remember, which goes back a long while, but then at the World Bank, and then CalPERS, one of the world's largest asset owners, and now Franklin Templeton, where she is the global head of sustainability. Anne, thank you for being with us. Matt, on the other side, is founding executive director of Eurosif, in fact, in 2002, and has led teams on responsible investment and governance and EC regulatory recommendations before joining AXA, and now Allianz Global Investors as Global Head of Sustainable and Impact Investing. Matt, thank you very much for being with us. Bertil started as, actually, I rather like this in your bio, you started as the Cultural Conservation Officer for the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs in working in the DRC in Africa, which is probably one of the coolest starts to our CV we can all agree with. But before moving into sustainable investing at Oddo, then foreign and colonial, and is now still at, I think, at Sycamore Asset Management. So a huge welcome to all of you. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to ask each of them just to summarize their thoughts on this question, this exam question, of do investors care? And if so, why? And I thought we'd start, if we may, with Anne, and then we'll move to you, Matt, and then Bertil will finish with you. And we'll then, again, the same format, we'll kick off some discussion, but questions from you as to what you think investors either should or are doing in this debate would be very welcome. And we're going to finish on time at 8 o'clock, because if there's one thing I've known is that you don't get in the way of the audience and their cocktails. Anne, over to you.
That's corporate responsibility in action, Rupert. Starts with punctuality. So listen, it's wonderful to be here, and I realise this is the last session, and people are probably feeling a bit tired. But I want to ask you all a question. We're talking about investors, so we're talking about money. How much money do you think there is in the world? Hands up, please. Extra points. If you're right or wrong, you get points. Well, it's roughly $500 trillion. So when you look at, say, the needs of the Sustainable Development Goals, which run at about 4.5, we're in the realm of grand affordability. So this is one thing that's really important to know about. We're not short of money. The second thing, to answer Rupert's question, do investors care? Well, they do because they have to, whether they like it or not. The money, that 500 trillion, bar a billion here or a billion there for the largely gentlemen coming out of Silicon Valley, who are the billionaires, we tend to be a bit dazzled by that personal fortune without realizing it's a tiny little bit of the 500 trillion which actually we have in the financial system. So where does that money come from? Any ideas? It is the savings of hard-working, ordinary people. If you look at pension funds, which are the single largest source of that money, or bank deposits, if you're looking at lending, or insurance, it's people insuring their houses, or even if you look at sovereign wealth funds like Norges or Kuwait or Saudi Arabia, this is taxpayer money. Now this is really important because what we've allowed ourselves to do is to fall into this false alternative between stakeholders and shareholders. Because when you remember where the money comes from, you realize that actually there is a community of interest in making sure that the system works. Now, investors also have this obligation crystallized in something which sounds very, very dull, but is actually very important, which is their fiduciary duty. And there are 3 bits to this. One is you have to be prudent. In other words, you have to make sure that if you're investing someone's money, you don't lose it, or it doesn't shrink or get eroded in some way. You have to be prudent. That means you have to think about all the risks that might be ahead. And there's efforts in the United States at the moment to tell investors you must not talk about certain categories of risk, say environmental risk. Well, it's very hard with fiduciary duty to say, I'll only look at some risks but not look at others. Secondly, you have a duty of care. That means, actually, I have to disagree with our learned professor. Investors don't like voluntary reporting. I mean, it's a good start, but actually what we need, and this is why it's so important, the work you're doing in Europe and in the US, we need comparable, audited, standardized information which is consistent across time and across geographies. So what's happening with IFRS, ISSB, California, SEC's just coming out, this is all music to our ears for the harmony that we need. We need information we can believe in on these other matters. And finally, investors in fiduciary duty have a duty of loyalty. So however hot and bothered politicians might be getting, the only people we have a duty to are those who have entrusted us with their savings, the people who that money actually belongs to. So what that means, when we're looking at all these issues about the system as it's working, it's the same people who are the shareholders as the community of stakeholders. And that community of interest is what makes all of this work. So instead of thinking about these as profit over here, and maybe environmental issues over there, we've all used this acronym ESG, which I think is tricky because, Rupert's heard me say this, there's no F for finance in that model. So instead what many investors are doing, we did it at CalPERS, we're doing it at Franklin, is saying we have to think about different forms of capital. Financial capital, we get that, we're investors. But human capital, and the Just Capital people are a good example of that work, as the professor was saying, but also natural capital. The air we breathe, the water, the biodiversity, the temperature of the earth, all of these are the natural capital. Now, whether that shows up on current accounting practice is something we all have to work towards getting fixed. But once you get this holistic approach to understanding risk, you understand that opportunity. So last line, does all this show up in an interesting and useful way in terms of people, planet, and profits, as someone was saying to me earlier today? Well, if you look at the Wharton Data Lab, you'll see that companies which are doing a good job on their stakeholder relations are also the ones that are doing well on their operational performance, which is showing up in improved cost of capital. In other words, investors can price this stuff. And when boards of directors are not ensuring their management is reporting fully on these topics and showing how they manage these risks in return, they're going to put the price of lending and the price of equity up. So companies that do a better job, whether they care or they don't care, they're actually able to raise money more cheaply. And I think with the push now on regulation, which is worldwide, it's going in different paces, different ways, we see there is for the first time a global goal of net zero emissions, greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. So we're now, with that nested within the Sustainable Development Goals, we've actually got a to-do list, which is shared by most governments in the world. So that means you have the visible hand of government and the invisible hand of the market increasingly working together. So.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Matt.
Oh, I thought we were sharing. Sorry.
Thank you. I think I will answer this in a different way to create a prism for all of you in the audience. So the kind of 3 things I'm thinking about around this question would be the idea, first of all, do they care? They care, but they're confused.
Are you?
The people I work with are definitely confused. And I'm with people who are very confused about this whole topic. So I deal with investment teams all day long, and they do care. That's the good news for the audience. But if I think about the 3 areas that we often look at and the challenge in negotiating about what to do on the idea of purpose, and how to make it real. I'll start with the first one, which is around the idea of the narrative. So corporations are very good at the narrative, including on purpose. For the most part, there's a purpose now, not just at Best Buy, there's a purpose almost everywhere that is bringing something that is feeling about societal solution. Not everywhere, but often. And so you'll have these investment discussions looking at putting more money into a specific, if it's an equity investment, into a stock. And they'll do this with lots of investment teams. And we'll talk about corporate purpose. And I'll just use one very glaring example because it's an easy one for the audience to understand that this is happening across all sorts of different companies we look at, which is, which purpose? What is purpose? Is it just enough to say in an automotive company that we're trying to create the future of the automotive industry by making cars more affordable and off of fossil fuel? Sounds great. Of course, everybody loved Tesla when it first started to do this successfully. Everybody said that is the idea of purpose, and it does everything right. And then we start to see how it slips. And we start to see whether it be looking at what's happening with Sweden and workers' rights, whether it goes back into the US, whether it goes into the idea of how much money should be, and that was the case in Delaware, about whether or not we agree. Because you could argue all the way back those incentives, governance, payment incentives, no one thought that was possible, what Elon Musk could achieve. But then you come now at this point, you say, it's not fair. Why not? So that discussion about purpose, that's how it shows up on an everyday basis, which is that there is definitely an interest in it. There's an interest in the narrative, but afterwards it's about how to make that narrative understood as is one part of that purpose of that narrative, in this case a very focused one about the automotive, shifting the automotive sector, acceptable when other parts of what one might expect to be attached don't stack up. And I deal with that every day, and it's hard. The second one, I want to come back to our professor on what I've seen change. Demographics and generational change. I was a Wharton student, and I remember at one point in class, years ago, many years ago, asking the finance professor, but what about environmental costs? What about looking at sort of like social behavior? And I was literally said by this professor, a very Milton Friedman professor, are you a communist? I'm sure you have this, Professor. Okay. So what I take stock in is that question is no longer asked. And I see it with the MBA students that come into contact and want to be in the industry, but also including in the companies where we invest. We see that to attract younger people, they're asking that question. And so that is something that is, if you look at the regulation that we've heard, that is a great sort of top-down thing that might help influence. But I take a lot of inspiration by the idea that this youthful change might be happening faster than we expect. I have high hopes in it because I see it not only in my own company, which has frustrated the senior management of my own company about, God, are they satisfied yet? Because they're asking about purpose, and they want to see the delivery of it. And I see it in the companies that we invest in, that question's coming up. We look at customer surveys, we look at different information sources to measure the impact of companies on how they're achieving their purpose, measured by their employee satisfactions. And then the last one is going to come back to governance. And it's true that the hardest part of investing in public markets, I do a lot of my time in private markets, which is slightly easier, but let's stay to public markets, is that there are lots of us out there that care, but we have different ideas about how to bring that message to corporations and to senior management teams. And so my idea of what would be the proper governance model and the incentive structure to help ensure that corporate purpose is moving through the organization might not be the same as my colleagues here. We might share some of it, but we might have our own little special sauce, a little bit more hot sauce on one side, a bit more on the sort of sugar on the other. And I think that is part of the hard part if you're a corporation, is you have a lot of investors coming at you about what their idea of what your purpose should be according to some of their beliefs. And so this idea of how to attach the purpose to the incentive structures, we need the corporates to ultimately push us back and say, this is why we're doing it. This is how our purpose is going to be through the operational system, including the way that we pay ourselves, the way that our board is aligned with our purpose. And that helps to convince us that, okay, we might have other ideas, but we at least understand them. So we need that give and take to continue to improve.
Thank you. Bertine?
Great. I think we heard several times today people mention that the corporate purpose can also be to maximize profit. It doesn't have to be about a social or an environmental goal. And yes, that's true. But I think we're all here today because we know it's about something else. It's about the why a company exists. It's about its utility, the utility of the products and services that it puts on the market for society. And I just want to start with that to answer the question of why investors care about corporate purpose. I think many of us have actually realized, even though we're shareholders in publicly listed corporations, that a shareholder-centric model is actually too reductive. Yes, it's about maximizing profit. It doesn't mean just in the short term, but the idea about shareholder capitalism and maximizing profit, meaning over the lifetime of a company, and the subsequent idea, which is that a company will have to integrate and incorporate its impact on the environment, on its employees, on its customers, and that all this will be internalized into its capacity to generate future profits indefinitely or sustain them, and that therefore we don't need to talk about stakeholders, but we can simply continue with shareholder capitalism. I think it's a fantasy, because if you look in the real world, asymmetry of information, opacity, just the structure of the markets currently mean that there are a lot of flaws that don't enable this to permeate. So what I did in 2015 when I joined Sycamore Asset Management, I stopped talking about ESG and I decided to look at the way we analyze companies with a stakeholder lens. So we built a model called the SPICE model. It's an acronym that stands for the 5 key stakeholders of a company. So S for suppliers and society, P for people, I for investors, C for clients, and E for the environment. And what we do is that we look at a range of criteria, about 80 different criteria, that we rate from 1 to 5. And this final rating actually has an impact on our valuation of companies. So it's just a very pragmatic way of integrating the fact that a company will only be able to sustain value creation if it creates value for all of its stakeholders. We also launched in 2015 a fund called Happy at Work, based on the premise, so it's a catchphrase, but it's really based on the premise that a company who creates the environment for its employees to be motivated and engaged will actually be the best performing company. And it's part of the SPICE model actually, so it's the people pillar. And it's built on a sense of purpose, the authenticity you get, the autonomy, equality and equity within the organization, the diversity, how you develop, train, retrain people. I think so far the backtesting has shown that the best performers in our funds since 2015 have been those companies that had the highest Happy at Work rating. So I did hear what Rodolphe mentioned. It's not just about having a purpose or a purpose statement that will drive economic and financial performance, yet if you take a lot of other things into consideration, and mainly employee engagement and motivation, you can get there. So maybe just one last word to say that Sycamore has been on a mission journey. So in 2019, and I think someone asked the question earlier on, talked about the PAC law, so the law in France for business growth and transformation, that actually changed the French civil code to enable companies to add to their articles of association a raison d'être, or corporate purpose, and also created in the French commercial code the status of société à mission, or mission-led companies. Just going back to what Matt was saying, that has very real implications beyond the corporate purpose. So you have to set social and environmental objectives within your articles of associations. You have to create a mission committee in charge of reporting and monitoring the implementation of the mission. And then you've got to get these social and environmental objectives audited. So they are just going back to the measurement point that Aleksandra made. This is also something that we track and something that we've been doing at Sycamore. But it's still a journey.
Wonderful. Right, so we have 20 minutes before the cocktails. So I'm going to kick it off with just one question around, which actually it sort of emerges, I think, really from what all of you have mentioned. So Aleksandra has talked about regulation both sides of the Atlantic. You've talked about what's happening in Europe and the falling at the politicization of regulation. Bertil and Matt, you both talked about, Matt about measurement, and Bertil about the different mechanisms where these can be held into account. I'm sensing that purpose only really works, and you've also mentioned this as well, I'm sensing that purpose only really works when you're mandated to do it by some form of external grouping, whether it be regulators or some external sort of policy guideline like the ISSB or others. Is it true that you have to be forced to account for purpose, or is it something that you have as a sort of desire and a wish to do proactively? I don't know who wants to answer that, but you can have a go. Yeah, you can have a go.
I could give a go at this one. So I recently heard some people speaking, about that, and I quite like the general approach. It's with us. It's the same like with us human beings, right? Or even raising children. I think the bottom line is you need a framework composed of both carrots and the sticks. And look, I think here the issue, and maybe drawing a little bit on what Professor Freeman said yesterday, actually, in the speech, I really agreed with everything, and I thought it was so insightful. But one thing struck me when he referred and said, like, this is, kind of the move to stakeholder capitalism. It's gonna take time. It's generational change. The problem is we no longer have time. And I didn't manage to cover it, but at the very end, I actually included some slides about, the IPCC report and other, climate science, which demonstrate. Now, probably I'm gonna sound like a capitalist or, dangerous activist, but basically, the reality is we no longer have time to mitigate and adapt to the climate change. Even if we want to think about even our, life in, 30 years' time or 20 years' time about the future of our children, I think this is the issue. And I think, look, it's true that by creating only the incentives to act and hoping that, companies and people will do the good thing, of course you're making progress. And of course there will be always companies, like in this case, for instance, here I think we have really an excellent panel, showing perfect examples of investors that are doing the right thing. But the problem is not everybody is like that, right? So maybe drawing back a little bit on your earlier question, I think probably not all investors care, but yeah, there is a whole bunch of great investors that do care. But the reason why at some points we may need regulation is to bring forward the laggards. And also, then also to create a level playing field, because right at the end of the day, companies who actually make efforts to do the right thing, it also costs extra usually, right? So at the end of the day, if you try to at least, put somewhere this bar higher up, you kind of, bring the others with you. But anyway, I guess you guys would like also to share your views on that.
Could I just wanted to talk about the reality of the political pressure being applied on this topic. So in the United States, where I work at the moment, 21 attorney generals in different states wrote to the top 10 fund managers, so that includes Franklin Templeton, you must not pay attention to environmental, social, or governance issues. A small group has raised, according to the New York Times, around $1 billion to finance the shutting down of investors who are paying attention to these sorts of issues. Now, in our own strategy, because we don't use ESG, we've kind of navigated around it because we're talking about risk and return. But you've got the House Judiciary Committee issuing subpoenas on this topic. I have 2. Is that a badge of honor, Rupert? I hope. But this is intimidating. And you will have seen a big initiative where investors, to Matt's point, got together to say, hey, it is confusing for companies. What are we asking for? Let's all ask for the same three things. You know, governance, targets, and disclosure. And that's climate action 100 plus. And we convened that from CalPERS, you know, the big pension fund where I used to work. But now what we've seen under pressure, in an election year in the US, a bit like the story Aleksandra was telling us about the EU, fund managers pulling out, rushing for the exit. I think the 5 biggest fund managers have left with contradictory and slightly confusing reasons. But when you're being boycotted and told you can't do business in certain states if you pay attention to climate risk, that's then hitting these investors in the pocket. So right now, just a conversation. I'm all in favor of conversation, but you can't negotiate if you have a gun to your head. And it's this power dynamic that I think we mustn't be naive, we mustn't be sentimental, we must understand that change can be painful and difficult and be very clear-eyed about the forces at work.
But you've talked in the past about the evolution of corporate purpose in France, what's happened. Just talk us through what's happened and give us a sense of what you'd recommend in terms of a regulatory environment. What should we be looking for? What does good look like in France?
Well,
Thank you for the Paris Agreement.
Yes. You're most welcome. Yes, it started actually long before 2019, but that's when the law actually was enacted. And I think the first thing that the French government did was recognize that the company was not there just to make profit, but that it also had a responsibility towards its corporate interest, weaving in environmental and social consideration. And so I think I briefly mentioned it before, but what happened subsequently was the status of mission-led companies. So there's now a community of mission-led companies in France. I think there's about 300 companies that are part of it. Some publicly listed companies have now become mission-led companies, so Danone is one of them. The first one in 2020, but we also have other organizations like Clariane, the long-term nursing home company.
Just to be clear, that joining that requires you to operate to certain standards.
Yes.
And operate with certain disclosures too.
Yes.
And also amend your articles of association.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. So it's a fundamental. So this is not just a sign up and forget it.
No, you need to amend your articles of association. So for publicly listed companies, it means that you need to have 2/3 of the vote during your general meeting. Then you amend it to add your corporate purpose. Then you amend it to also add environmental and social objectives that are then audited by a third party, and you create a governance body, the comité de mission, the mission committee.
So it's got some teeth to it.
In order,
it's got
exactly.
Some teeth. Okay.
And I think that's the only way to do it.
Yeah.
So a consultant asked me, actually writing a paper about raison d'être, so corporate purpose versus mission-led organizations. And of course, if you don't do that, if you don't derive like very tangible social and environmental objective, if you don't integrate that within the governance,
so that's where we are now.
Anything,
that's where we are now.
Often.
What's your recommendation for what's needed next? And then Matt, I'll bring you in as well.
You mean in France? Or?
In France.
In France? Well, I think you've got this voluntary initiative in France, so we're pretty much ahead of a lot of other countries. So maybe at the European level, that could inspire.
That could inspire some change
exactly,
at the European level. Okay.
Exactly.
Matt, you had a...
I'm only going to add one, because there's so many we could do. But I think one that would make a difference, and this goes back to the inertia of money and the plumbing of these systems, is I would say that the EU, French government, whatever, governments, they have to play a bit of a role on being smart, on saying the financial system largely is predicated upon having a portfolio construction that is compared to a benchmark. The whole system is made this way. So make those benchmarks that they have to incorporate some of these criteria that get closer to purpose. Because right now the whole system is based on looking at the normal benchmark where they're not. And you meet all the different types of investors who think, I like your corporate purpose stuff, Matt, really nice. But by the way, that benchmark is going to drive what I do. I hear it all the time, and not just in my company. It's an industry-wide problem. So add something around that. The EU tried to do it, but that would help just create more behavioral change with just a plumbing piece.
Very good. I've got one more question, and then we're going to have questions, 10 minutes of questions from the floor. Authenticity has come up across the board. How do you, as investors, evaluate authenticity? Matt, I'm going to start with you.
Elon Musk is authentic. It doesn't mean we are necessarily valuing that as the top level of authenticity. So I would say that it's a great buzzword. It's a great, do you get it, authenticity. It's often used that way. What I would say is you need to go back to brass tactics and decide if that authenticity, what does it mean in terms of delivery? Is there some idea of equity? Is there a checks and balance system that you can have your authentic message as a corporation, as a leader? Does it translate to the authenticity of other people in the company? So we're often looking to see how much does that authenticity carry into the value or into the rhetoric, way beyond that top leadership, the C-suite, into other areas that we might come into contact with.
And you ask those questions, yeah, and you dig into that?
Yes.
Okay. Bertil?
Yes, I think to me authenticity is about alignment and aligning what you say and what you do. So when we meet a CEO, we'll ask what the values are, whether, what the corporate purpose is. And a lot of the times you'd be surprised, but actually I think it was Professor Freeman mentioning that before, but when we ask about the values, yes, they're plowing through their annual report, they can't find the values, so they remember 2 out of 5, but they know yes, they've got 5. Yeah. That already tells you a lot about the way it's lived through in the organization. And then what we also do is site visits. So of course it works. It worked a lot better when we invested in smaller sized companies. But on site visits, we had a sort of 5 or 6 questionnaire actually that we we talked to different employees and asked them about whether they felt that their opinions were being considered, whether they knew about the strategy, whether they, and there was also some question about alignment of the values prone by the company
so that's
externally.
The intent of the due diligence directive already in place.
And just one thing, I think there's a real danger of having companies that do a lot of marketing around their corporate purpose and their value, but if it doesn't permeate throughout the organization, then it creates a lot of frustration and a lot of people actually going the other way and not being engaged.
Okay, questions for our investor panel. Anyone would like to kick off? Or have we stunned you into silence? There's a question down there.
Okay. Hi there. Matt, you mentioned this idea that investors try and, in a sense, promote their vision of purpose onto the firm. And ideally, the firm's executives would speak to you to kind of clarify their purpose. What do you think the best channels are? And what are the mechanisms through which executives could do that? Would it be investor calls, speaking to you one-on-one, specific actions like investment, divestment? What would you expect to see to clarify it?
Answer that, and then anyone who wants to ask a question, let Iris know, raise your hand, and we'll take the mic. So
make sure I heard the question correctly. What would be the best mechanism for the company to articulate that to the investors, right? Yeah. So I'll tell you one thing I'd love to hear on any earnings call, which is done on a quarterly basis, that the corporate purpose comes back up and how that purpose continues to translate into company strategy and into actual examples. It would be a great exercise that it's not just the once a year or the one investor day, but it's just part of how they work. right? That's a very simple tactic that would be oh wow, it keeps coming up, and you have all these investors on these calls, right? You got the transcripts now that the AI is just delivering that into different systems that we have internally, that would come up in not just a marketing way, but a restatement each time, and how it's continuing to evolve, and what different types of people that then might talk to what they're doing in different types of strategies or different operating business units. That would be a great way to continue to reinforce the point. So I'd say I just use that as kind of a classic one, because it's so often looked at, the earnings transcripts and the earnings calls, that I think it'd be just an easy one to have as a win.
I vote for Matt's idea with one caveat, because the long-term investors typically are not interested in the quarterly earnings calls. The traders who drive most of the buying and selling in the short term are on the earnings call. So I'd want to supplement that with stewardship. And that's when you would make sure you're talking at board level or C-suite level, probably once a year with the companies in your portfolio, and also to make sure you're not confusing them all, make sure that you've also got some shared understanding of the challenges with fellow investors. So whether it's an initiative, as we mentioned, on human capital management or climate, there's also other initiatives which are getting consensus around issues like water risk, like biodiversity. So I think there's conversations outside with your fellow investors and civil society and regulators, but the stewardship would complement the earnings call. Maybe that's two things that would go together.
And just going back to something that Rodolphe Durand mentioned earlier about M&A, I think it's, so keeping in mind, of course, that not all companies do M&A, but when they do, I think that's a question that ought to be asked. You know, why, and how does it fit the corporate purpose to divest this business or to invest in that company? And some are starting to do it actually quite well, but others, frankly, are just simply not there, and it shows. It's just very obvious that the mission and the purpose is not guiding every business decision.
Final questions. One more here. You get the benefit of the last question of the day.
Thank you. A former sustainability director at Barclays used to say at one point that nobody cares whether Miami will be under 6 meters of water in 100 years' time. So he lost his job on this sentence. But did it say aloud that what many fund managers actually think and do not care do not say out of fear?
Yes, I'm sorry, but my hearing has gone really bad since COVID. I think it's the headsets, and I couldn't hear before the 100 years old.
No, Barclays sustainability director at a conference said something like, nobody cares whether Miami will be under 6 meters of water in 100 years' time. And I don't know whether you remember that. He lost his job on that.
So it was a comment made that no one will care in 100 years' time about what's happening today. Yeah?
If you're a pension fund like CalPERS, our liabilities, when we were modelling these issues, run beyond 100 years. When you look at the life expectancy of the youngest dependents of current members, we're on a century game, which gives a very different perspective to, say, active hedge fund traders or quarterly earnings people. So the time horizon of your liabilities really matters.
What I would say is, if your question is about the industry and those working within it, the goal has been how to take on what Anne has just mentioned, which is that long-term horizon, and figure out ways to shrink it for those who are never going to get there. And so that's what I think a lot of the asset management industry is doing now, is looking at how to create, whether we call it corporate purpose, or you think about an environmental sort of tweak that you have to show in your portfolio construction, or by the end of the year, did you lower your emissions a bit against a goal that was set by the company? These are call them the tactical ways to influence that behavior, if those kinds of people are still going to be purely on the incentive structure and not about, let's say, the purpose, of which there are those people. So if I get kind of to your question, I don't think sustainability people in the firms are saying that, but I do think that PMs will think that. Sure.
And I beg to differ, actually. So I can't remember exactly Stuart Kirk's comment, I think. But
It was, I think, HSBC, by the way, not Mark.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Right. He did. Yeah. But no, we do care about what's going to happen in 100 years, every single day for every single investment decision that we make. Because the way we value a company's share price is, and a business is by looking at the free cash flows that this company will generate until the end of time. And so the terminal value can have represent a huge share of a company's price today in the stock market. So yes, of course, we'll make a decision as to how the company is going to grow. So we do care.
Well, on that note, I'd like to say a huge thank you to our panel. Thank you very, very much indeed for being with us. Rudy.
Yeah, so I will just, I just want to finish this, and I don't, I know that there is a cocktail just after that, but yes, certainly, I mean, it's the time for thanking lots of people. You know, it takes a village to grow a conference. So I wanted just to thank, of course, Hubert Joly and Professor Freeman for being with us today. We had 16 guest speakers today, so 4 of you are still here. Some of them from the afternoon are also around, and really, really thank you for making it to us. I am so delighted to have been able to organize this second Purpose Day with Oxford and all the team. SNO will be joining the Enacting Purpose initiative that, Robert, you said. So the big thank goes not just only to Rupert, but to Hannah, Caroline, Samuel, and Laura, who participated in this event. And of course, last but not least, the entire SNO team that made this possible, that you saw, you crossed paths with. I want to start with my partner in crime, Romain. Executive director of the center, was too shy to sit on stage with me just before, so I think we should applaud it twice. But we had also, in no order, Véronique, Carole, Elisabeth, Anne Prel, Romane, Lauriane, Céline, Céline, Isaline, sorry about that, Angela, of course, Harry, Andrew, and Pauline from the research team, Ines, Marie-Andre, Ekaterina, and also one very special thank to a person that probably all of you interacted with, which is Iris, last but not least. Iris, if you'd like to come here, I think that you deserve this. And now it's time for cocktail.